Okay, I'd like to welcome all of you to this special program of the Goldman School of Public Policy, one in our series of international public policy speakers. And I'd like to thank Blas Perez Enriquez and his colleagues in the in executive and international programs for putting all of this together. It's a special privilege to have with us today the U.S. ambassador from Syria to the Syrian ambassador to the United States. And I'll describe his background in a bit. But let me make a couple of brief housekeeping comments first. This is a university, and we expect civil discourse. You can have civil discourse better here than in any other place. So we expect the ambassador to make some remarks and also to offer a slideshow while the remarks are in progress. After his remarks are over, we will be receiving your questions and comments by cards, and we'll offer them to the ambassador, and he will comment as he sees fit. We have members of one of our Goldman School classes here who can stay for the opening remarks but cannot stay for the question period. It is not a political statement that they might leave. It's that they have to get back to their class. Please shut off your cell phones and pagers and all your electronic equipment. Dr. Imad Moustapha is a very unusual individual in many respects. He is not a career diplomat. He's a lifelong academic, an expert in computer science, who holds a doctorate in computer science from the University of Surrey in England, and has published very extensively in the technical literature. Most recently, he's been Dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at the University of Damascus. But he's also a prolific writer on a wide variety of subjects, not just technical, but also political, cultural, economic, and other issues. And he's published in many journals and newspapers throughout the Arab world, and also the LA Times and the Washington Post. What I find among his impressive background particularly noteworthy is that he was one of the co-authors of the United Nations sponsored Human Development Report in the Arab world. For those of you who don't know this was a path-breaking work written by Arab scholars that was very analytical, critical, and self-critical of the problems in the Arab world. And it really made global headlines and hopefully has had some great effect on thinking in all over the world. He's been on television in the US, in Britain, in Syria, and various Arab news programs. He also will be speaking actually tomorrow at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. It's very rare for us to hear directly from a senior official of the Syrian government to get his candid views on a wide variety of subjects. I'm sure there's a lot we're going to learn, and there's a lot you're going to ask him about. So without further ado, please let me welcome Ambassador Moustapha.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Or is it good evening? No, afternoon is good. Let me start by thanking Dean Nacht for kindly inviting me to come and speak at this school. Actually, I was originally invited to speak at a club that is totally unknown to me. Forgive my ignorance of the United States, great U.S. traditions here, which is the Commonwealth Club. And I agreed because I love to come to San Francisco a lot, and I thought, why not? I'll bring my wife and kid with me. And then Berkeley, UC Berkeley, called and said, would you like to come to this school and talk here? And I said, wow, this is exactly what I would love to do. And now I was told while I was meeting with your colleagues that actually the prestigious place is the Commonwealth Club. Don't believe it. Everybody across the world, including my own country, Syria, we hear a lot about University of California, Berkeley. And I am thrilled today that I am in this place. Believe me, this is one of the highlights of my career here. Speaking about career, one distinguished feature that Dean Nacht has not mentioned is the following. I happen to be the only ambassador of a rogue state in the United States of America. It's such a unique honor that I enjoy tremendously. Other rogue states do not have ambassadors in the United States of America. So with this unique position that I occupy, I really enjoy my life in Washington, D.C. As you can imagine, it's, to be honest with you, an uphill battle. It's not easy at all. Add to this the fact that I do travel a lot across the United States and talk at universities, World Affairs Councils, city clubs and such things. And I end up with very, very tough questions that make my life really difficult. So I devised this trick. What I do is I accompany my speech with a slideshow, hoping that this slideshow will divert your attention. You would not pay enough attention to what I am saying. And by the time I finish my remarks, you will not really focus on the important questions. So I will start by running this show and give you my remarks before we move to the Q&A session. Let me just start by reminding you that Syria is a very small country. You can barely see it. You can barely see it. Yet, I remember a year ago, during the war in Lebanon, when Israel was bombarding Lebanon, destroying its infrastructure, 2/3 of its infrastructure, killing 1,300 civilians, and when the United Nations Security Council passed the resolution demanding that all parties cease hostilities, Israel dropped 1.1 million cluster bomblets and left on southern Lebanon. Lebanese people are still paying a dear price of their lives in Lebanon because of those cluster bomblets that keep on killing civilians in Lebanon today while we speak. While this was happening last summer, Secretary Rice made a public statement in which he said that Syria is the cause of all problems in the Middle East. Of course, this is an honor that I always feel very proud that because it is being bestowed upon us. Wolf Blitzer, a friend of mine at the CNN, invited me to appear in his program and comment on what Secretary Rice has said. So I went there. He started by replaying a tape in which he repeated the statement, Syria is the cause of all problems in the Middle East. Then he said, we have with us the ambassador from Syria. What's your comment on what Secretary Rice has just said, Mr. Ambassador? And I said to him, it was a live broadcast, well, I empathize with what Secretary Rice has said. Probably she's right. Having said this, today we have three major problems right now in the Middle East. One has to do with Lebanon. While we are talking, Israel is bombarding Lebanon. The other one has to do with the U.S. occupation of Iraq. The third has to do with the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. If someone would tell Secretary Rice that Syria is not the occupying party, neither in Iraq nor in Palestine, Syria right now is not bombarding Lebanon, she might change her mind about Syria. So you see, the problem is only about informing the guys in this administration about Syria, and they might change their minds about Syria. Unfortunately, this is just a fantasy of mine. I know things do not go as simple and as easy as this. But by telling you this story, I have, in a way or another, reminded you of the three major conflicts or crises in the Middle East today: Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq. And I also have alluded to the fact that bilateral relations between Syria and the United States are very, very difficult at the moment. Please do remember that was not the case throughout the recent history between Syria and the United States. Yes, we have always disagreed with the United States on policies. And understandably enough, the United States has always disagreed with many Syrian policies. We have never liked the fact that the United States has always offered blind, flagrant support for Israel while Israel was occupying our territory. Having said this, we also understood that the only way forward for us and for the Israelis, for everybody in the Middle East, would be a peaceful resolution of this ongoing conflict. And we have always realized that the United States of America, the most powerful nation that the history of mankind has ever known, arguably. And the world unique superpower is the only country in the world that is capable of brokering such a peace agreement between the Arabs and the Israelis. This is why, as far as we are concerned in Syria, it is of a pivotal interest, or a strategic interest for us to have good working relationship with the United States. And this is why it has caused us great distress, and it has caused us incredible amount of problems and troubles that the United States is regarding Syria in a very hostile way right now. I mean, of course, the US administration. The gentleman right here asked me a very short question a couple of minutes ago. He asked me, how would you characterize relations between our country and Syria right now? I told him, I don't think we have any problems between Syria and your country. We have a problem between Syria and your administration. I can discuss this in detail during the Q&A session because I don't tend to give lengthy remarks. Very soon I will stop so I can address your questions immediately. And the guys who want to leave also can leave whenever they want, either immediately after my remarks or during the Q&A session. But coming back to the bilateral relations, what I was trying to say is, even when we disagreed with the United States on policies, we always had a good working relationship with the United States. I can give you examples. Our troops were next to your troops when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and there was a world coalition driving the Iraqi occupation from Kuwait. We were fighting alongside you. And when the United States requested from Syria that it sends troops to help liberate Kuwait, to be blunt and honest with you, the United States really did not need the Syrian military prowess. It's the symbolism of it. Be careful. It was so important that the United States did not want to present itself during that war as a Western power imposing itself on our part of the world. This is why it asked Egypt and Syria to join Western powers in liberating Kuwait. Another example, to prove to you how our relations were not that bad in the past, had to do with September 11. After the tragic events of September 11, every country in the world, as you know, sent letters of condolences to the American administration. Well, Syria was a little bit different. Yes, we did send a letter of condolences, but we did something else. We, in Syria, initiated, and I underline the word initiated, contacts with the United States, telling them, look, for the past 20 years, we have been fighting against extremist fundamentalist organizations like Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. They are our own sworn enemy, and we have a wealth of information about Al-Qaeda. And we would be more than happy to provide you with this information, expecting nothing in return. We were not looking for a tit for tat. We understand very well the nature of such organizations, and we know that as far as they are concerned, we, like a secular government of Syria, are even worse than the diabolical infidels of the West, because at least we had the chance to be touched and enlightened by their version of Islam, and we rejected it. So we are even worse than you are, guys, in the eyes of people like Al-Qaeda. And we provided the United States with what the US has called, quote unquote, actionable information that has aborted 2 planned operations against US interests. One was planned to take place in Canada, one was planned to take place in Bahrain. And then Secretary Powell sent the US Congress leaders, or actually all members of the US Congress, a letter in which he, quote unquote, thanks Syria for helping save American lives. That was the sort of relation we used to have with the United States prior to the war on Iraq. Of course, the US administration was critical of Syria, and we were critical of the US. But historically, we used to believe that when you have a problem with another country, you need to intensify diplomatic engagement, discussions and negotiations with that country. You don't boycott the country. Let me end by reminding you of the following fact, and then, if you don't mind, Dean, I will stop here so we can immediately address the Q&A session. I know you have lots of questions. Every US president, starting with Richard Nixon, ending with Bill Clinton, has have paid Damascus an official head of state visit. So suddenly, out of the blue, we become this rogue nation, the most eligible candidate to join the list of the axis of evil and the cause of all troubles of the Middle East. Having said this, we still believe that we cannot afford to have bad relations with the United States. My instructions from my government, because we have, to be honest with you, we have given up on trying with this administration, is to meet with every congressional leader from both sides of the aisle and to tell them, regardless of what you hear about us, we are committed to improving relations with the United States. We believe that it serves our national interests, your national interests, and even the national interest of Israel to have good relations, good working relationship between the United States and Syria. We will keep on knocking on that door, and we will be relentless about this, because as I have said, we cannot afford, a country like mine cannot afford to have bad relations with the world unique superpower. If you don't mind, I'll stop here right now, and then if you want to start the Q&A session, I would be more than happy.
I think we're collecting questions. While we're collecting them, let me ask you this. In the Middle East peace process, to the extent that it has existed with Israel, with respect to Egypt and with respect to Jordan, as you well know, ultimately there was a land for peace deal. And when Israel withdrew from Egyptian territory, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty and resumed diplomatic relations. The same thing with Jordan. Here you have potentially, and we've had it since the '67 war, a land for peace deal with Syria and Israel. What has prevented Syria from reaching an agreement with Israel as Egypt and Jordan have?
Thank you. This is an important and a major question. And I think let me address the whole Israeli-Syrian dimension of the Arab-Israeli conflict. But let me start by reminding you of something of vital importance, and then I will go back to exactly your question and why did not no peace agreement between Syria and Israel has materialized in the past. In the past, similar to what has happened between Israel and Egypt on one hand, and Israel and Jordan on the other hand. First, let me tell you that every Arab state, without a single exception, including my own country, Syria, have all embraced the so-called, at the time, Prince Abdullah peace initiative towards Israel, and thus has become the official pan-Arab peace initiative towards Israel, based on the principle you have just outlined, which is the principle of land for peace. Simply stated, telling the Israelis, let us solve this ongoing conflict once and for good, for all. You give us back our occupied territories, the Syrian Golan, the Lebanese Shab'a farms and Ghajar village, and most importantly, the Palestinian occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. Allow the Palestinians to have their independent sovereign state, just like every other nation in the whole world, and get in return comprehensive peace, normalized relations, normal diplomatic relations with all Arab countries, trade relations, cultural relations, academic relations. Let us end this conflict. And we still believe that this is a fair compromise. Give us back our occupied territories, that you claim you need them for your security reasons, and get in return absolute, comprehensive, full security, normal relations. If you really want to live in peace with us, to be accepted as a neighbor, if you really, I'm talking not about you, about the Israelis, if you really want because I don't think you really would like to become our neighbors forever in Iraq, do you? Let us clarify this. If really the Israelis want their grandchildren to live in peace with our grandchildren and to be accepted, they cannot continue to impose on us their policies of occupation by virtue of their sheer military superiority. There should be a historic compromise between us and them. And in a way, you have mentioned how this has happened between the Israelis and the Egyptians and the Israelis and the Jordanians. Let's go back to the Syrian-Israeli track. This is a largely unknown story here in the United States, despite the fact that it is well documented not by the Syrians. I usually hate to quote Syrian references. When I was telling you about our cooperation with you on Al-Qaeda, I quoted Secretary Powell. What I will tell you will be exactly based on two major works by President Clinton, his biography, autobiography, and by Dennis Ross, who was the United States Special Envoy to the Middle East for 14 years, and who was mediating a peace agreement between Syria and the Israelis. According to those two gentlemen, and please do verify what I will tell you reading their books, don't take my story for granted. Remember, I am the ambassador of a rogue state. According to Dennis Ross, Itzhak Rabin, the late Prime Minister of Israel, realized that the only solution to this conflict would be based on the historic land for peace principle. And in order to convince the Syrians that he was sincere about it, he put it in writing. He wrote that he was willing to withdraw from the Golan in return for Syrian peace agreement, normalized relations, and a comprehensive package between the Israelis and the Syrians. He put this in writing, and he deposited it with President Clinton. This is mentioned in President Clinton's book. And thus it became known historically as the Rabin deposit. Once Rabin put this in writing, because prior to that the Israeli leaders used to refuse to commit themselves to such a withdrawal, immediately the Syrian-Israeli peace track started. And strangely enough, despite all the enmities and all the political differences between Syria and Israel and all the previous wars, issues suddenly started to be addressed and resolved relatively easily. Issues between Syria and Israel were not as complicated as those between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Within a very short period of time, an Israeli-Syrian draft peace agreement evolved and was formulated based on the land for peace principle. And in a way, everybody in Syria, and probably also, presumably, everybody in Israel, believed at that time that peace was there, and very soon peace will prevail between Syria and Israel, and of course between Lebanon and Israel, because of the situation at the time. Everybody thought that Lebanon would follow suit. Itzhak Rabin got tragically assassinated prior to signing this agreement by an Israeli extremist from the right-wing parties of Israel. And for a moment, the prospect for the Syrian-Israeli peace agreement became unclear. Shimon Peres, who succeeded Itzhak Rabin, sent us a message through Dennis Ross. This is mentioned in his book, The Missing Peace, telling us, the Syrians, that Peres was not only interested or committed to continuing what Rabin has started. Actually, he wanted to accelerate the pace of the negotiations. He wanted to finish everything so that the peace agreement would be signed and then ratified by both countries. We were glad to hear this, and eventually this peace agreement materialized as a document. I still have at my embassy in Washington, D.C., a copy of this draft peace agreement between Syria and Israel. However, Peres at the time, if you remember this very well, or if you follow Israeli politics, wanted to capitalize on the sympathy that the Labour Party has gained in Israel after the tragic assassination of Itzhak Rabin. So he decided to call for early, unwarranted elections. We worried about this in Syria, and we sent him a message through Dennis Ross telling him, sign and ratify the peace agreement first, and then go to your elections, since they were not mandatory. He wouldn't. He wanted to consolidate his power base in the Israeli parliament, the Israeli Knesset. He called for early elections, and he lost the elections. As Dean Nacht might know well, the very first speech given by the newly elected Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was, I do not believe in the principle of land for peace. I believe in the principle of peace for peace. Syria wants peace. Syria gets peace, but never their Golan back. And the whole peace process stalled between Syria and Israel. If I remember accurately, around 3 years, a little bit less. But then Benjamin Netanyahu was replaced by Ehud Barak. And for the second time, within this 5 years period of time, He sent us a message telling us he wants to resume the peace process. We told him, we already have the peace document. Review it. If you're happy with it, let us sign this peace agreement. He said, no, I will not follow the same pattern of negotiations followed by Itzhak Rabin. I want a different pattern. Rabin was personally negotiating all the details of the peace agreement between Syria and Israel. He insisted on bilateral committees under the brokerage of the United States, in which each committee will address a specific issue between Syria and Israel. We said no, it would be a waste of time, but then what can we do? It takes two to tango. We cannot make peace with the Israelis while talking to ourselves. So we agreed. And for the second time, a second round of peace talks between Syria and Israel took place. Commissions were discussing everything, every issue you can imagine, mutual security arrangements, and they ended up with a partial peace agreement. Diplomatic exchanges after the peace agreement would be signed, and they ended. Water resources, you name it, it was there. And a second peace document materialized for the second time within 4 years. And once again, according to Dennis Ross, what happened was the following. Barak started getting negative results in public opinion polls in Israel. And according to Ross, because we weren't there, he said to Dennis Ross, you know what, I have a forthcoming elections, I might lose the peace agreement with Syria, but I don't plan to lose the forthcoming elections in Israel. He got cold feet and he decided not to go ahead with this peace agreement. He went to the elections and he lost the elections. And the comment of Dennis Ross was, and thus Barak lost both peace with Syria and the elections in Israel. I know I'm making it a little bit lengthy, but believe me, I'm trying to condense our history as much as possible. In a nutshell, Ariel Sharon became the Prime Minister of Israel. In his maiden speech at the Knesset, he said, I'm quoting him to the letter, I am not interested in resuming the peace track with Syria. I exactly know the price the Syrians want for their peace with us. They want back their Golan. I am not willing to give the Syrians back the Golan. Today, we still believe, this is my comment now, stop about history. We in Syria still believe that there is no other solution. We will not be able to defeat Israel militarily and push them back from the Golan and regain our occupied territories, thanks to the great support the United States of America provide Israel. And on the other hand, Israel might win this war, that war, the other war, but Israel will never succeed in pushing the Arabs so hard so that the Arabs will succumb and say, okay, we give up, you want our territories, take our territories, what can we do? We will accept whatever terms you impose on us. So neither the Israelis will know peace, nor we would regain our territories unless there is a peaceful agreement between us and them. This is our realization. And believe me, I don't like to talk on behalf of the Israelis. I hope you invite the Israeli ambassador to talk to you. But I follow up Israeli politics closely, and I read the major Israeli newspapers. There is a very formidable constituency for peace in Israel. It's still a minority, but it's a large minority, not a fringe minority. There are people in Israel who also believe in what I have just said to you, that the only way forward for the Israelis is to allow us and the Palestinians and the Lebanese to have back their territories. Yet they are, as I have said, still a minority. I hope it's a growing minority, because sometimes it's like a pendulum. Sometimes they are on the rise, sometimes they are ebbing. And however, personally, I believe that this is an inevitable historic process. One day, 2 years from now, 7 years from now, I'm not sure when, you will hear that the Israelis and the Arabs have signed a peace agreement. And the Israelis have finally decided to give us back our territories. And we have finally normalized the relations with Israel, recognized Israel and everything, exchanged diplomatic relations with Israel. As long as this is not happening, people will continue to suffer in our part of the world, more and more civilians will be killed, and lots of bloodshed will take place. We believe in Syria that Israel needs a leader with a vision and the historic courage similar to what Itzhak Rabin used to have, he will be able to conclude such a peace agreement. As long as the Israeli leaders are entangled and meshed in their daily small petty politics within Israel itself, domestic politics, they really will never be able to deliver such a historic and bold act. We can't impose on the Israelis what we believe should happen. One day it will happen, and I challenge you, if this happens, I challenge you to remember this, that I have said this at one point here at Berkeley. Sorry for this lengthy, I think my answer was longer than my remarks.
I don't know, I was watching the slide.
The trick is working.
So we have several questions about Lebanon and the Syrian role in Lebanon. One questioner says that Lebanon was occupied by Syrian military forces for 25 years, that Syria removed its forces after Mr. Harari was assassinated, that there have now been 8 anti-Syrian members of the Lebanese parliament assassinated in the last 2.5 years, and the UN is investigating Syrian complicity in these assassinations. What is your comment?
That's another long story. Do the guys plan to leave before I start? Okay. Look, as you have noticed in the question, as read by Dean Nacht, the Syrian occupation of Lebanon was used. Let us remember facts, not arguments, because arguments can be met with counter-arguments, but facts. And let me start by admitting that, yes, Syria has committed mistakes in Lebanon. And I will tell you what sort of mistakes we have committed in Lebanon. But before that, please put things into context and remember the actualities, the actual history of Lebanon. Lebanon was going through a bloody, lengthy civil war that lasted for 15 years, in which people in Lebanon were killing each other. In Arabic, we would say al-hawiyya, which means based on their identity card. You might be stopped in the street, they will ask you for your ID, and if you happen to belong to the wrong sect, you will be immediately murdered or assassinated. Militias were exchanging gunfire all the time. Beirut, that used to be the most vibrant and beautiful and open city in the Middle East, was totally destroyed during that civil war. And of course, that civil war was not unprecedented. It was the third civil war in the last century in this history of Lebanon. After 15 years of bloodshed, the Syrian army went into Lebanon. It's true. So we had a military presence in Lebanon. When we entered into Lebanon, the United States of America supported our presence in Lebanon. The word occupation was never ever used by the United States of America. The United Nations supported this. The European Union supported our intervention in Lebanon. The Arab League, most importantly, fully supported the Syrian presence in Lebanon, and the former Soviet Union also and the Soviet bloc supported our presence in Lebanon. And we did end the civil war in Lebanon. As I have said, we have done bad things after that, but at least I can be proud of something. Let us be objective. We succeeded in putting an end to the civil war in Lebanon. And throughout our presence in Lebanon, Lebanon was peaceful again. There was no bloodshed between the Syrians and the Lebanese. The Lebanese were able to rebuild their economy. Actually, they fared better than we did. So if you really considered us, because I cannot argue with what you personally believe, we were the occupiers, they were the occupied, but they had a higher standard of living than the one we had. Okay, their economy was faring better than our economy while we were occupying them. But most importantly, Beirut was totally rebuilt, and again, it regained its past splendor and became the pearl of the Middle East. Compare this to the other two occupations in our region, to the conditions that the Palestinians are living through, and to the situation today in Iraq. But let me focus on Lebanon right now. During that time, all the Lebanese leaders who are today described by the United States as the leaders of the Lebanese Civil Revolution were our allies. They were the allies of the Syrian evil occupation. So actually, technically, they were collaborators with the occupation. Needless to say, prior to our entrance into Lebanon, they were the warlords of Lebanon who used to fight each other. Once we left Lebanon, they became the leaders of the Lebanese Revolution for freedom against the Syrian evil occupation. But this is, it's just descriptions, words. The facts are the following. Once the United States and Syria had bilateral problems with each other because of the war on Iraq, because our opposition to the war on Iraq, suddenly, within a fortnight, the US administration that never used the word occupation to describe our presence in Lebanon, go and check the archives of whatever US official statement prior to those years, suddenly we became an evil occupation of Lebanon. And suddenly, our presence in Lebanon became illegitimate, which might be fair. Because, as I have said, our presence in Lebanon became stagnant, and most of the Syrian officials positioned in Lebanon went into, and I am ashamed to admit it, but I have to admit it, went into corrupt partnership with the Lebanese officials, the very same officials that today happen to claim to be the leaders of liberty and democracy in Lebanon. But this is unimportant. Both were corrupt. We became corrupt, and they were our partners in that corruption. And that was bad for Lebanon, but it was equally bad for Syria, for many reasons. We are, by the way, normal human beings, just like you are. In a very short while, you will see faces of Syrians. I have put them on purpose. So you realize that they are normal human beings. We also have our aspirations. We also would like to combat corruption in Syria, which is widespread in Syria. We have reformists in Syria who believe that we should work hard on cleaning in our house. And we have many corrupt officials in Syria here and there. And it happens everywhere. It's an evolutionary process. But let us focus on Lebanon. Sir, the day that we became an evil presence occupation in Lebanon, we realized, because we are a regional player, probably we are a little bit powerful in our region, but we cannot face international powers and say to them yes or no. Once the United Nations Security Council passed the resolution demanding that Syria leaves Lebanon, and it only issued this resolution after the fallout between Syria and the United States on Iraq, we left. When we left, these are facts. You can hate us, you can demonize us, you can say we are terrible guys, but the fact is we left peacefully. Not a single bullet was exchanged between the Syrian army and the Lebanese people or the Lebanese army. By the time we left, not a single square inch of the Lebanese territory was annexed to Syria. Nobody claims this. We never demolished a Lebanese house over the heads of its inhabitants. We never uprooted cedar and olive trees from the Lebanese soil. And when we were there, Lebanon was actually doing a very good job. All of those leaders were our closest allies, particularly, and now the big name, Rafiq al-Hariri, the late Rafiq al-Hariri, who is described here in the US media, in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, as the major opponent of Syria. Extraordinary. What do these people know about Lebanon? He used to be our closest ally. When we were, quote unquote, occupying Lebanon, guess what was the job of Rafiq al-Hariri? He was the prime minister of Lebanon under the Syrian, quote unquote, occupation. For how long? Guess, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? No, for whole 10 years. He was the prime minister of Lebanon. And he was our closest ally. In the very same day he was assassinated, which was a terrible, horrendous crime. In the very same day in the morning, a daily newspaper in Lebanon, As-Safir, interviewed him. Anyone who reads Arabic can go and check the archives. In this interview, in the very same day he was assassinated, he was praising, according to his own words, the historic, strategic relation between Syria and Lebanon. So this guy who always was our closest ally, till the very last day he was assassinated, suddenly we wake up next day and we read in the American media that he was really our enemy. Fair enough. Let us suppose he was our enemy. He was assassinated. Nobody knows who assassinated Hariri. And I know you will tell yourselves immediately, what is this guy talking about? Syria assassinated Hariri. Fair enough. You are academics. You are not propagandists who work for the US version of the Pravda, the so-called Wall Street Journal. And you are not journalists at Fox News. Let me tell you facts so that we don't go into the murky area of accusations and counter-accusations. Today, there is an ongoing investigation investigating the assassination of Hariri. Actually, it's the largest investigation in the history of mankind. The chief investigator, Serge Bramerez, is heading a team of 400 people, experts, forensic scientists, detectives, international policemen, who have been working in Lebanon for the past 2 years and a half. They are working so hard trying to reveal the truth about who killed Hariri. It's only here in the United States that everybody knows that it was Syria who killed Hariri. It's so easy to accuse a country or someone of a crime when you don't have any clue about it. But let me say this to you so that we will be fair and we will accept whatever will happen. Two main facts, and these are facts, they are not arguments. Probably most of what I have said before might be argument. The first fact is, when I went to the Congress and invited Speaker Pelosi to visit Damascus 5 months ago, at the beginning she was hesitant, then she accepted. 3 days prior to leaving for Damascus, somebody whispered in her ear. He told her, "Do you plan to go and visit Damascus and meet with the Syrians who assassinated Hariri? What are you doing?" And she had some second thoughts, and she asked me about this. I told her, "Look, Speaker Pelosi, I'm the ambassador of Syria. Naturally, I would defend the Syrian position. Why don't you go and read a neutral document?" Serge Bramerez, the chief investigator, has submitted at least 4 reports to the United Nations Security Council. These reports are available on the internet. Google them. Go and read what he is saying, not what I am saying. In each report, he praises the Syrian cooperation with his investigation. 2 facts. First, Syria is cooperating with him, and we are committed to cooperate with him, and I'll explain to you why. Second fact, he doesn't know who killed Hariri. It's only President Bush and his aides who know who killed Hariri, because they have already decided that we killed Hariri. Now let me tell you the Syrian position on this. This is so important. This is a pure Syrian perspective. Nothing was more damaging to Syria in its recent history, and it's in our modern history, as much as the assassination of Hariri. It was the most damaging blow that has ever befallen Syria. Nothing was more difficult for us and more troublesome for us than this assassination. Our enemies and our foes have capitalized on this terrible crime, while Syria has been accused by this crime. And the only way for us to be vindicated, exonerated, is for this investigation to succeed. The day Bramerez and his team would reveal the truth about the assassination of Hariri, would be the day in which Syria will feel that it has been vindicated. For a simple reason. If any Syrian officers or Syrian security agents or anything have participated in this terrible crime, fair enough. President Assad has said publicly on the record in a meeting with CNN's, the famous lady on CNN International, Christiane Amanpour, he said to her, if any Syrians have participated in such a terrible crime, this is akin to high treason, and it should be punishable by the most severe possible penalties, because those guys, if they really were involved in such a crime, have inflicted terrible damage on Syria. But who are they? Where are they? Where is the proof or the clue or any indicator that would really say, here are the guys who committed this terrible crime? As far as we are concerned, we are committed to help Bramerez and his investigation. We believe that if he succeeds in revealing the truth about the assassination of Hariri, Syria will get off the hook. If he fails, it will be so good for the enemies of Syria. They will continue to say, well, why? It's true that we can't prove it, but most probably it was the Syrians who did it. It's a very complicated, fraught issue. I don't want to talk more about it. What I would expect from learned people like you is wait till this investigation ends and let them decide who assassinated Hariri. I think this is a very fair position.
There are several questions about nuclear weapons in the Middle East. Here are 2 of them. One is, what is your government's view of the impact on the Middle East if Iran unequivocally acquired nuclear weapons? And the second is, in the recent Israeli air attack on Syrian territory, it's alleged that Israel attacked a nuclear reactor provided to Syria by North Korea. And it was surprising that almost no government in the region or the United States government has chosen to speak about this. And in fact, the attack was not denounced by, in this questioner's mind, by any Arab government. What explains the silence in response to this attack, and what can you tell us about the North Korean-Syrian nuclear relationship?
Okay, it's a twofold question. The Iranian nuclear project, the Syrian nuclear project. Do you want me to start with this or that?
It could be a little bit brief, because
In brief, Syria opposes any proliferation of WMDs in the region. The United States is alleging that Iran is trying to acquire nuclear technology. Iran is saying they are trying to do this for peaceful purposes. The United States doesn't believe Iran. We think that nuclear technology is bad for the whole Middle East. And we dislike lots of things about the United States, but we like one thing about the United States regarding foreign policy, which is that the United States has a declared foreign policy opposing the proliferation of WMDs in the Middle East. This is one thing that we like about the United States. Syria went to the United Nations Security Council and tabled a draft resolution calling for the whole Middle East to be free of all weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological. And the very same day we tabled that draft resolution at the Security Council, of course, in our draft resolution, we called for the Security Council to be empowered by all mechanisms and modalities to ensure that the Middle East was actually free of all WMDs. And the very same day we tabled that draft resolution, the United States of America immediately vetoed it. We discussed this with the Secretary of State here, telling him, isn't that extraordinary? Syria, the rogue state, submitting a resolution that totally complies with the US announced, declared official policy about WMDs, and the United States vetoing it. And their reply was, we have not changed our policy. We are still against all WMDs in the Middle East. We just don't think this is the right time for such a resolution. Of course, it's very clear what is the issue. The issue is that the only country today in the Middle East that has WMDs is Israel, that stockpiles a huge number of nuclear warheads. Actually, Israel has the world's largest per capita nuclear arsenal. If you divide the number of nuclear warheads that Israel possesses on their population, you will understand what I mean. So with this unfair world that we live in, this double standards world, it's fine for Israel to stockpile nuclear technology, but everybody else is prevented. We are against this. We don't want Turkey to have nuclear technology. We don't want Iran to have nuclear technology. We don't want Syria to have nuclear technology. But most importantly, we also don't want Israel to have nuclear technology. Let this Middle East be free of all WMDs. We think this is a fair position. The United States does not believe in fairness when it deals with the Arabs and the Israelis. It believes in double standards. I think this will lead us immediately to the second story. Be careful about this. Syria has never ever had any program to introduce nuclear technology into Syria in the past. We don't have such a program today in the present. And as President Assad has said in an interview to BBC World Service a couple of weeks ago, we do not plan to introduce nuclear technology to Syria in the foreseeable future, for a variety of reasons that I can discuss with you at a later stage. The whole story about this North Korean, Syrian cooperation on nuclear technology is a total, sheer, absolute fabrication that only found any credibility here in the United States. Nowhere else. And I can elaborate on this. Be careful about this. Even Israel itself did not claim that the target of its air raid was a nuclear project. The South Koreans, who carefully monitor the North Korean nuclear program, their president at least twice, once was 3 days ago and once was immediately after the story started to circulate in Washington, D.C., have actually said that as far as their intelligence was informed, there is no Syrian nuclear cooperation. And most importantly, the atomic, what is it called? The Atomic Commission in International Atomic Agency in Vienna has said that they have no information whatsoever about any Syrian nuclear program. And they were clear about saying, if any country in the world believes that the Syrians have a nuclear program, don't bombard and then come and tell us first. Let us investigate. We will send our inspectors and we will see if there is a nuclear program or not. Now, be careful. This is a very sinister story. And I can't believe that everything is being repeated for the second time within a time slot of 5 years. Exactly the same sort of lies that you used to hear about the Iraqi WMDs, the relationship between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. What I cannot believe is how can the U.S. media be so gullible to exactly believe the same stories for the second time within 5 years. I wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times telling them, how is it possible that such an institution like the New York Times can be Judith Millered for the second time within 4 years? You know who is Judith Miller? She was the journalist who used to publish one story after another about the credible information, intelligence regarding the Iraqi WMDs. Let me be candid and honest with you and blunt, because I also have friends in Washington, D.C. I have befriended many prominent journalists in New York and in Washington. And one of them told me, he works at the New York Times, he told me that on semi-daily basis, it is the office of the Vice President of the United States of America that is providing the Washington Post and the New York Times with the successive reports on the nuclear program of Syria. Why? They have their own reasons. Go and ask them. We don't know what's going on in their mind. Are they preparing for World War III? We don't know. They don't talk to us. We are a rogue state. So they don't talk to us. We don't understand them. If you ask me my analysis, why are they doing this? A simple reason. I believe. I can't prove it. It's just thinking loudly. As you know, the United States has just signed an agreement with North Korea leading to the decommissioning of the North Korean nuclear installations. And as you know, this agreement was not popular at all among neoconservatives and right-wing hardliners in Washington, D.C. And they were very critical of this agreement. John Bolton appeared on Fox News after this agreement was signed, and he, on the record, said that the United States should not have signed such an agreement with the Koreans. The United States does not negotiate with rogue countries. The implication was the United States bombard rogue states. The United States does not negotiate. Suddenly, 3-4 weeks later, all these stories started to circulate about the evil rogue North Koreans sending their nuclear technology to Syria. And Bolton appeared again on Fox News and said, you see, I told you we should have never trusted the North Koreans. We should immediately revoke this agreement because they are now trafficking their technology to Syria. Never trust the North Koreans. This is one scenario. I'm not absolutely sure about, I'm only sure of two things. One thing is a fact, an irrefutable fact. Syria does not have a nuclear program. And another fact, all these informations, all these stories, all this so-called intelligence has one source, the office of the Vice President of the United States. I'm absolutely sure of this. Having said this, we don't know. What are the motives? Why are they trying to do this? What are their plans? Are they probably thinking of attacking Iran? And then they tell themselves, since we will attack all the evil guys, why not attack also Syria? But we need a pretext. We have already convinced the American public opinion that Iran is a dangerous state. Why not also tell them that Syria also is a dangerous state? I don't know, to be honest with you. These are very, very serious issues that should be considered. But it's for the American people, not for us. We cannot put any brakes on the U.S. administration. The American people and the American voters can do this. It's a purely American issue. It's for you to decide if you want also to introduce democracy and prosperity to Syria as you have done to Iraq. It's your choice.
If you could, what was the site that was bombed by Israel?
It it was a military site. And this is not the first air raid in the history of the Syrian-Israeli conflict. And it will enter the history of this conflict as a footnote. I am not privy to military details. I assure you that the fact is that, yes, Israel did attack a Syrian military target. It was a minor air raid. 3 Israeli jet fighters entered into Syria. I'm not belittling this fact, but put it into its context. It's so easy for Israeli jet fighters to cross into Syria. The distance between Damascus, the capital city of Syria, and the Syrian-Israeli ceasefire fire is only 30 miles. It's so easy, not only to fly over Damascus, but to fly over Aleppo or over Deir ez-Zor. Theoretically speaking, it's very easy for any Syrian missile to hit any Israeli city, Acre in the south or Tel Aviv or any. But, you know, this is theoretically, but can you imagine the repercussions of if we would escalate into yet another open conflict? So while we are saying that what has happened is very bad, but this has been like between Syria and Israel like this for the past 30, 40 years. The unprecedented thing is what's happening here in the United States. All these diabolic stories about the Syrian nuclear program. So if you compartmentalize and separate those issues, you can deal with the Israeli-Syrian dimension of it. It is yet another episode of this ongoing conflict that I have discussed at the beginning of this speech. But if you look at what's happening here, I think this is more sinister.
There are several questions about Syrian domestic politics. Let me try and summarize them. One of the questioner writes that after Hafez al-Assad assumed power in Syria in a military coup, he administered a very harsh regime, and opponents of the regime were hung publicly in the square in Damascus. After Hafez al-Assad died and he was replaced by his son, there was hope that the regime would moderate and become more open, some other language here. What explains the seeming continuity in domestic Syrian policy between the father and the son? And a related question is, you make a distinction between U.S. government policy and the U.S. people. How representative is the Syrian administration today of the Syrian people?
A very friendly couple of questions. Look, I'm not claiming that we are angels and everybody else is a demon. And I'm also not claiming that you are the demons and we are. I'm just saying we disagree with the United States on issues. And the United States, I have said this at the beginning of my speech, the United States disagrees with Syria on issues. But the cornerstone of the turmoil in the Middle East is the Arab-Israeli conflict, this ongoing occupation that is deeply hurting the psyche of the nations of the Middle East. And we believe in a way or another that the United States has taken sides in that conflict and has decided that it wants to fully, absolutely support one side against another side. Even here in the United States, nobody denies this. Nobody says, no, it's untrue, we are fair arbiters between the Arabs and the Israelis. It is never said. Everybody here in the United States accepts, yes, we in the United States, we fully, absolutely support Israel, whatever Israel does, regardless. Not everybody in the United States believes in this. Some people are critical. Some people believe that this is not only detrimental to U.S. national interests, but also to Israeli national interests. Sometimes if you have a friend and you really care for that friend, you need to be courageous, brave enough to tell that friend whenever that friend is wrong, to say, enough is enough. We think that this is the time. We, as your closest ally, we need to tell you that you need to stop this policy or that policy. Coming back to Syria, to be honest with you, the first question really was a statement about how bad we are. I lived all my life in Syria. I am very critical. I am personally very critical of many things in Syria. And I'm not saying this because I am here in the United States. I have been very critical of many things in Syria while I was still living in Syria. You have mentioned the fact that I am a co-author of the United Nations Human Development Report in the Arab world. I was a co-author. We published a series of reports discussing the three major deficiencies in the Arab world. A deficiency of knowledge, a deficiency of women's rights, women's empowerment, and a deficiency of freedoms. Okay? So it's not like now that I am far away from Damascus, I feel free to criticize Syria. Having said this, to be honest with you, I lived all my life in Syria. I've never seen the opponents of Hafez al-Assad hanged anywhere in Syria. So, but yes, we have a bloody, tragic chapter in our history. Prior to what you have done in Afghanistan and Iraq, we used to be severely criticized by the detractors of Syria here in the United States, when the Muslim Brotherhood overtook the city of Hama in Syria and declared the Islamic Republic of Syria. And of course, they executed the Syrian officials and the Syrian army officers, and they announced the Islamic Revolution that will be widespread across Syria. And yes, it is true, Hafez al-Assad sent the army there, they surrounded them, and it was a bloody, bloody battle, and they were totally eradicated after that. You might agree with this, you might disagree with this, but the astonishing thing is that this is exactly what the United States is doing in Afghanistan and Iraq right now. They send their troops to Al-Anbar or here or there, they fight against Al-Qaeda, insurgents or terrorists, or call them whatever you want. Exactly. I'm not defending what happened in Syria. I'm just describing what happened in Syria. Just describing. I will leave this to the judgment of history. The second half of the question.
I'm representative.
Good. Good. I think this is a fair question. We might be representative, we might be less representative, but you need to understand, this is our region, this is the context of our region. And we have problems in our region. I have discussed with you the fact that Syria is one of the rare secular countries in the Middle East. Rare. Syria is one of the countries in the Middle East, very, very few countries, probably Tunisia is the only other country in which women enjoy equal rights to men under the Syrian constitution. The levels of, as an example, of religious freedoms in Syria are unmatched across the Islamic world. As an example, every Christian holiday is a national public holiday in Syria. You will not find this in Egypt or in any other Arab or Islamic country. Having said this, I'm not trying to spin Dr. Syria. There are many things that, as I have said, I can be very critical of about Syria. But the issue is the following. Here in the United States, the discussion is so twisted. Let me remind you of the Bush Doctrine, and you will understand what I mean. The Bush Doctrine was the following doctrine. The real problems in the Middle East are not caused by the Israeli occupation of the Arabs. Those are the lies forwarded by the Arab petty despots. So that they can continue to oppress their people. And because the people are oppressed, they become terrorists and they attack US targets here and there, or Israeli targets here and there. So what we really need to do is not end the Israeli occupation, but we need to introduce democracies into the Middle East, because democratically elected governments in the Middle East, this is the Bush Doctrine, not my doctrine, tend to be very friendly to Israel and to the West. So the Bush Doctrine had a wonderful opportunity to be applied in the Palestinian territories, where the Palestinians went and freely elected the government of Hamas. Freely elected. What happened? The United States immediately imposed terrible draconian sanctions on the Palestinian people because they dared to elect the government they chose to elect. And then the Bush Doctrine was modified, and it became the peoples of the Middle East are absolutely free to go and elect their own governments, provided they elect governments we approve of. If they do not, then they will be severely, severely penalized. What I want to say is Syria today considered a democracy according to the Western standards? Probably not, arguably not. But at least there is a process, an evolutionary process. Syria is opening up. Nobody can deny this. Socially, economically, on the educational level, and also even politically. You might not be happy with the pace of progress in Syria, but at least it's happening from within. You tried to introduce democracy and prosperity from without. And look at the tragedy that has befallen the Iraqi people. Let us, as I have said, we deserve our own better future. And we Personally, I believe that also this is inevitable. I have said that peace between the Arabs and the Israelis is inevitable, and also political progress, political modernization, more democracies, more freedoms are inevitable in our region. Having said this, what amazes me here in the United States, the fact that you forget that democracy is not a static state. It's an unattainable ideal. The difference between countries in the world is by how far these countries have moved towards this unattainable ideal. Remember your own history. You remember the slavery. Remember the women's rights. Remember you worked hard to achieve what you have attained, and you also had your setbacks. We also have our setbacks in Syria. You had your Patriot 1 and Patriot 2. You had your wiretapping. You had your honorable Guantanamo Bay. It's a process. Nations do move forward, and sometimes they do have setbacks.
Couple more questions.
I need to leave at 5:30.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Right. I don't think you'll find this a hostile question. It's actually just a sort of a question about information which took place while you've been ambassador, and it reads as follows. Several months ago, Syrian police stopped an assault on the U.S. Embassy in Damascus. Secretary Rice thanked Syria publicly, and this questioner thought that the event might provide an opportunity to improve diplomatic relations between Washington and Damascus. Why did that not occur?
That's a complicated question, and I think it might be the final question because it will address a very important issue. It is true that once we realized that the United States was planning to invade and occupy Iraq, Syria opposed this war on Iraq. I was a member of a Syrian delegation that was dispatched from Damascus to Washington, D.C. to try to argue with our then American friends not to occupy Iraq. We told them, look, we belong to that region. We understand what will happen if you embark on this enterprise. We believe that what you are saying publicly is untrue. Iraq does not have WMDs. There is no relation whatsoever between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. This is on one hand. On the other hand, regardless, if you invade Iraq, you will be unleashing forces you really do not understand. I remember we told the United States that for you to invade and occupy Iraq would be equivalent to opening a Pandora's box of woes and evils. And we told them you will be fueling extremism and anti-Western sentiments across the Middle East. Of course, they dismissed our arguments. They ridiculed us to the face. I remember I was there personally. It's a part of my life story. They said to us, you claim that you belong to that region and you understand that region. Let us tell you what will happen. Within 2 months of our liberation of Iraq, Iraq will become a model of democracy and prosperity that will inspire the whole Middle East, and all nations of the Middle East would be dreaming of having the same fate as Iraq. After that, relations collapsed in a terrible way, in a way that really damages and hurts us. I'm being very honest with you. And for a while, we didn't do anything, but then a year later, as early as April 2004, we started attempting to re-engage with the United States, telling them, look, you are already in Iraq, and here we are caught between the hammer and the hard place, but we want to help. We need to help you stabilize the situation in Iraq because it is affecting us as well. And because we fear that if Iraq spirals down into flagrant open civil war, the repercussions would be terrible on everybody, particularly on Syria, with a mosaic of ethnicities, cultures, and religions far richer than the one that Iraq has. And luckily enough, for the past 2,000 years, we managed to live harmoniously with each other in Syria. And of course, we are troubled by the Iraqi model. Well, all our attempts fell on deaf ears and were flatly rejected. Time and again, we tried again, nothing happened. This incident about attacking the U.S. Embassy in Damascus by extremists and being defended by the Syrian police is a minor incident. And yes, there was a thank you letter from Secretary Rice, but it was a merely diplomatic token. There is no desire or political will to engage with Syria. The most important story is the following story. After the Baker-Hamilton report was issued, when Baker and Hamilton strongly recommended re-engagement with Syria, the Democrats jumped on this report and started making contacts with Syria. A large number of Democratic leaders started visiting Syria, meeting with President Assad, discussing prospects for improving U.S.-Syrian relations. This culminated with the visit of Nancy Pelosi and 7 of her colleagues to Damascus. When Pelosi came back from Damascus, she was ferociously criticized by the U.S. administration, particularly by Vice President Cheney himself, who personally attacked Rice for this visit. 2 weeks later, I was invited. This would be the final story. I will try to be as succinct as possible, but it tells a lot, and it describes the whole nature of relations between Syria and the United States. I was invited to meet with Senator Richard Lugar, who is the ranking Republican in the International Relations Committee in the Senate, and who was the chairman of that committee prior to the November elections last year. Lugar said to me, Mr. Ambassador, go and tell your government to prepare their agenda for bilateral talks between Syria and the United States. I was flabbergasted. I told him, but Mr. Senator, this is strange. You are asking me to do this while the U.S. officials are publicly admonishing Syria and saying we don't want to talk to Syria. He said to me, forget about what the public statements. When President Bush invited the Republican leaders to meet with him and explained to us his security and military surge plan in Iraq and asked us to support his plan, we told him, Mr. President, we will support your plan provided it is accompanied with a diplomatic surge with the neighboring countries of Iraq, particularly with Syria, and the U.S. administration has agreed on this, so go and tell your government to prepare itself. I was bemused, but I communicated this message to Damascus. 2 weeks later, only 5 weeks after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Damascus, Secretary Rice requested a meeting with her Syrian counterpart. The meeting took place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. That was the first meeting after 3 years of a policy of we never talk to Syria. We don't shake hands with the Syrians. The meeting took place. The meeting was not bad, actually. We were surprised by the result of the meeting. She immediately started the meeting by telling us, look, we both have stakes in stabilizing the situation in Iraq. It serves your national interest. It serves our national interest. Can you help us on stabilizing the situation in Iraq? In the past, she said this, you helped us against Al-Qaeda and you helped us against Saddam Hussein. Can we initiate such cooperation between us and you on Iraq? We want to establish military intelligence and security cooperation between Syria and the United States on Iraq. And our foreign minister said to her, it was a 20-minute meeting. It was a brief, practical, operational meeting. We said to her, well, we don't mind. We would love to resume such a cooperation. But we can't do this while you publicly say we refuse to engage politically and diplomatically with Syria. It's undoable. While you publicly say we don't talk to the Syrians, you sit with us and you say, but you have to help us on Iraq. We are not a charity. To be honest with you, we are a state. We have interests. Huh? You want something from us, we want something from you. Right now, we want improvement in relations between Syria and the United States. Hopefully, this will lead to the revitalization of the peace track between Syria and Israel with the U.S. brokerage. But on the short term, we just want re-engagement with the United States. And she said to us, well, I'll send officers from the DIA and the CIA to Damascus, and based on the results of their meetings with their counterparts, I will consider what might come at a later stage. And we said to her, this can't work. We can't tell the Syrian people that while the United States is lambasting Syria on a daily basis, accusing us of all sorts of evils, boycotting us, refusing to send an ambassador to Damascus, we are actually helping the United States in there. It doesn't work. Start by sending an back the ambassador that you have recalled. Start by inviting our Assistant Secretary of Foreign Minister to Washington, or sending your Assistant Secretary of State to Damascus. Normalize diplomatic and political engagement with us, and then we can move towards cooperation, actual cooperation on Iraq. And in a way, she didn't say no. She said in a way, she said that was a reasonable proposition. And she gave us the impression that we will hear from her very soon, and she left. As I have said, it was a 20-minute meeting. That was it. She went back to Washington. 1 week passed, 2 weeks passed, nothing happened, as if the meeting did not take place in the first place. Well, nothing at all. Exactly the very same sort of relation. I requested a meeting with Senator Lugar, and I will end my story here. I went, I said to Senator Lugar, Senator, a month ago you called me, you said, prepare yourself. Nothing happened. A meeting took place, blah, blah, blah. I reminded him of what took place in that. And that was the end of it. They didn't even bother to send us a message back telling us, we thought of it, we're not interested. And he said, he's a wise old gentleman. He said to me, don't be impatient, Mr. Ambassador. You need to understand right now there is this internal debate within the administration. The State Department he said this to me, the State Department is in favor of re-engagement with Syria. The Pentagon is supporting re-engagement with Syria, provided it is accompanied by military and intelligence cooperation. However, the Office of the Vice President and the National Security Council are strongly opposed to any re-engagement with Syria on any level. So you have to be patient till this internal domestic debate is resolved. And I said to him, Senator, this is purely theoretical. As far as we are concerned, nothing has happened. This is, happening within the administration. From our viewpoint, nothing has happened. Those were the facts related to that meeting, which is far more important than the mere thank you letter sent by Secretary Rice to us after the embassy incident. What I'm trying to say is, in a way or another, we in Syria have resigned ourselves to the fact that probably relations between Syria and this administration will not improve. Probably. We can't force them to engage with us. However, we are hopeful that whoever will be the next administration, and regardless of whether we are bad or good, I am sure because of the sort of questions I received, some of you firmly believe that we are the bad guys in the Middle East. Fair enough. What I want to say, even if we are the bad guys in the Middle East, you need to find a sort of cohabitation with the bad guys. Or you need to kill all of us, or somebody from our side would say, why not go and kill all of them? This is a vicious, endless, bloody circle. We have a very plain message. We want to live in peace with the Israelis, but we want our occupied territories back. We want to have good relations with the United States. What a coincidence. With the United States of America. And we want to cater for our own problems. We have lots of domestic problems in Syria, economic, social, developmental, you name them, they are there. But while we have to face our domestic problems, we are being put under extreme, tremendous pressure by this very powerful nation. Thank you very much.